Unfinished Business, Future of the American Women's Movement. Chapter 1, Yay for Women. Hi, I'm Bonnie Watkins, producer of this documentary series. I have a lot to cover in this chapter, so let's get going. Just to mention quickly, that's my ancestors behind me in a wonderful painting by Mike Rosberg. And on the cover is a picture of my mom, my grandmothers, and many other wonderful people. Don't forget, you can always go to unfinishedbusinessusa.com for more information. We'll start this chapter by talking about the dramatic changes the women's movement has already made, with two amazing women who changed the world. Then we'll talk with women of 3 generations about what the movement has meant to them personally. Also in this chapter, we'll have some basic facts about the progress we've made so far on women's dreams. And finally, because we know our work is not done, we'll hear some of the strategies that Cece and Silvia are using right now. Just 2 examples of historic changes that women brought about. Ann Bancroft was the first woman to go to both the North and the South Poles.
This is taking us a while to sort of plod our way to the pole, the visual pole. We're seeing it, we're going there. At this point, I've got the group shoulder to shoulder because I want us to come in together to signify this team.
And then these people come out and they're shaking your hand.
People are cheering on the sidelines and they're telling us, yay for women.
Touch the pole marker together.
In 1999, Minnesota elected me as the second woman to ever represent our state in the U.S. House. And last year, our state chose Amy Klobuchar to be our first elected woman senator. Women and girls today can take advantage of so many opportunities in education, employment, public service. We have even more women working in almost every occupation, improved earnings for women, athletic opportunities for girls, from kindergarten to college. And these have all been dramatic steps forward.
What has the women's movement meant to you? Let's hear some thoughts from 3 generations.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Watkins. Welcome to a conversation about the American feminist movement, past, present, and future. We hope to come up with some ideas about how to get all the way to gender justice. And I'm delighted to have today with me some incredibly special guests. My daughter, Cecelia Watkins, who is 24 years old. My dear friend, Silvia Ontaneda, who is 40-something, and I'm 60-something. So in some ways, we are spanning 3 generations. So I'm going to ask them to both just say a little bit about who they are, what's their current job, where they live.
So I'm currently living in Olympia, Washington, serving as an AmeriCorps volunteer with an environmental justice and food justice organization called GRUB, which is an acronym for Garden Raised Bounty. And with GRUB, I help low-income families build backyard vegetable gardens to sustain themselves and their families in the long term by growing their own food.
And Silvia, how about you?
I got into the diplomatic corps 3 years ago, and I'm an attorney originally, and I work for gender justice my entire life, and right now I'm Consul General of Ecuador to Minnesota, and I serve 40,000 Ecuadorians who are living currently in Minnesota. Women's issues are a lot. To me, it's one of the most barriers to overcome. We are hanging in there, trying to make a path for us.
As I said, I'm 62 years old. I've had a long career of working for women's issues in multiple different places for the state legislature and several nonprofits, in the executive branch of state government on several issues, notably pay equity. But now I'm self-employed. I have been an active feminist for almost 40 years, going back to the 1970s. So I'm at the stage in life where I really want to assess, what does that mean? What has it meant to me?
I asked the panel what were their early feminist memories and what did they do about it?
Well, growing up, of course, with you as my mother, feminism and women's rights always seemed so natural, so automatic, something I absolutely took for granted. And I remember when I was very young, I must have been maybe 12, 13, maybe 14, we did a 24-hour bus drive to Washington, D.C. for the March for Women's Lives, to advocate for the women's right to choose and women's right to make decisions concerning their own body. And I think going to that march was really the first time that I realized that there was a possibility even of us not having the right to choose, of us not being able to make decisions for our own bodies. And I think that really blew my mind. It made no sense to me. How would I ever let anyone else choose what I wanted to do with my body? So being at that march and seeing all of the other women there fighting for their own right to make decisions was really powerful for me as a young woman, 12 or 13.
You should tell about the uterus with the bobbing ovaries, shouldn't you?
Well, let's just say there were many different costumes there and puppets, one of which was a giant puppet of a uterus with ovaries, sticks in each hand that could bob.
I'm the oldest of 5 children and the only girl. And I had the wonderful privilege to being born to a woman that was amazingly aware of the rights of women, and a father who respected incredibly women. However, they were very conservative in many respects. I went to a Catholic school since I was 4. I graduated in that school, and I saw the nuns teaching us, you have to respect the priest, you have to stand up when the priest comes. And I started wondering, why a man, why not a woman to be a priest, to stand up for? And so that to me was the first questioning. And then the way I conceive God is not a gender, it's not about a gender, it's about an energy, it's about love. Even in Ecuador, I started an organization because I was an attorney, and unfortunately it doesn't get paid to be, we don't have that image of nonprofits and get paid to help. There is nothing like that. We started a movement, and we started with a couple of other friends doing free services, volunteer services for women who had been battered and victims, and kids, because the kids are the ones who are seeing that, role model of their parents, by being violent, drinking. So I started that, and that's why primarily I went to law school, because I thought, understanding the law, knowing the law, the rights, and our duties as human beings might help us change. There is a lot of social pressure. I think here you can be protected, but still the fear is there.
I'll give my answer quickly to that first question, which is, there were a lot of early things that happened in my life that seemed weird or wrong, but it was only until the women's movement of the 1970s that I started having the words to say what was wrong about that, and I'll forever be grateful for that. That just being able to articulate something is a big step forward. So just a couple examples. In high school, I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I mentioned that to our family doctor, who gave me a wonderful long speech about how it's really, what an interesting idea, but you don't understand that the government and through our taxes, we pay a lot of money to support people going through medical school. And then when women do that, then they immediately quit practicing medicine in order to have babies. So it's really kind of unfortunate, and don't do it, basically, in a very kind and gentle way. And again, I went, that's very logical. Okay, I see your point, and really did not pursue a career in science because of that. But really, in the 70s, when I read books like Sisterhood is Powerful, and I started saying, this is not just me, this is a pattern. But it was a very positive thing to say, now I understand things that just seemed weird before. It fits. Probably one of the most significant things I didn't come until the 1970s, when I was a clerical worker in state government, clerk typist 2 in the little system that they had with typewriters. And it was amazing. It was a very interesting job. I was the secretary for about 6 guys, and so I got all the phone messages. I did a lot of the typing for everything they produced, and I was the only one who really knew where anybody even was most of the time. But I wasn't treated very well. I mean, it was the kind of, why aren't you smiling? You should smile. Your function is to smile. Those kind of messages all the time. There were these little achievement awards for outstanding performance, which you were automatically not eligible for as a clerical worker. So those things just started piling up. So with some other people, I created an organization called Women in State Employment, or WISE, and we made a lot of problems.
I asked the panelists, what if the women's movement of the 1970s had never happened?
For one, my mother would be very different. And because of that, I think I would have grown up with immensely different values about what justice means in the world, what equality means in the world, and what my basic concept of civil rights would be completely different. But beyond that, and for my own personal life, I think some of the biggest things that would have affected me were not being able to play sports growing up.
Yeah.
Being a cross-country runner and a cross-country skier were hugely influential in my high school years, and being able to take leadership roles in those activities were incredibly important to my development and my self-esteem as someone who could lead others and grow and develop in a positive way. I don't think I would have studied science or fell in love with science the way that I did, or math for that matter. But since I didn't end up pursuing either of those things in college, I was a sociology and Middle Eastern studies major. Sometimes I wonder, how different would it really be? But I think for me, one of the most important things about the feminist movement is that it really values the aspect of choice. And it's not all about everyone has to be a scientist or everyone has to be a mathematician in order to be empowered and powerful in our society. But it's saying whatever choice you want to make is the right choice for you. Yeah. And that's okay. If being a woman to you means studying sociology, awesome. Do it, and more power to you. And I think for me to feel supported in the choices that I wanted to make and what I wanted to study changed my world and changed my life.
Yeah, great. And the fact that you're still active in sports today.
I bike to work every day, run a few times a week.
And I'm sure your health is better because of all those things. Okay, Silvia. What would have happened to you had there never been a women's movement?
In Ecuador, we are starting the movement. But in a way, as a group, we're starting it, but separately, I was always different. I thought, this cannot be happening. Why does a man have to cheat on a woman and it would be totally right? But a woman cheating on a man, but it was treated differently. Or just the fact that, as you say, choices. The fact that I now can have my kids and support them by myself and raise them by myself, that it wouldn't have happened. Of a woman to be able to provide. Before, I don't think that was ever addressed. To provide, to protect, and to move forward without, by yourself. Not that is nothing wrong to be a couple or be a family, the traditional concept. But I think I have a wonderful family, and it's my 2 kids and myself. You know what I mean? I met people like you, and here in Minnesota. If it wasn't because of you, I wouldn't have had the guts to say, okay, let's do an association of women and address our problems and see how we can get together and move forward. To me, that was meeting you was a big step, and you represent to me that movement.
Well, thank you. Silvia came to us at the Minnesota Women's Consortium, where I used to work, which is a wonderful collection of organizations, and said, we need to bring Latinas together because we have Latinas from, I think it's 17 different Spanish-speaking countries in the world who live in Minnesota now, in addition to many who've lived here for hundreds of years. But we're so different, but we have so much in common, and we need to talk to each other. And you're the one, and your organization is the one who is going to make that happen. So I was smart enough to hear when I get my marching orders what I'm supposed to do. So.
Even addressing the fact that economically, remember when you did the forum, the economic forum, the Latina Economic Forum? You know, being able to address that we are financially active, that we work at home as much as anybody work outside.
And that work is valuable.
Totally.
Exactly. My answer could go on for hours, of course, and being older than you all. If there had never been a women's movement, I truly don't think I would have ever graduated from college. But notably, I really needed access to birth control, and I was able to get it, as women a generation before me would not have been able to get it. And there came a time when I needed to have an abortion, and they were still illegal, but thank goodness there was a network of feminist clergy people, medical doctors, women, men who, helped me. And honestly, I could not have finished college if I had a kid at that time. But beyond that, it's really brought me an incredible career. As I said, I've had about 4 or 5 different jobs being a professional feminist, which there aren't very many of those jobs around, I always want to say, but it is such a privilege to just be there at the crossroads when some of those things happen, like you and the Latinas Association, when your activism in environmental things, the women who are coming together around things like water rights. But the one thing above all I want to say is the pleasure of bonding with other women. I'm smiling so much when you're talking about your family because I want to go, you do have a wonderful family. I'm so delighted to have met your kids. That being shoulder to shoulder, working for justice, and just appreciating each other as human beings.
Here are more answers to the question, if the women's movement had never happened, what would your life be like today?
I wouldn't have had the assertiveness that I got through being involved with other women and with people with disabilities who became more assertive. You know, I could be anywhere. Many of us were afraid we would end up in sheltered workshops, just because there just wasn't work out there. And that is just, that wasn't acceptable then, certainly not acceptable now.
Yep.
There also were women judges out there. And I mean, I saw firsthand, even back in law school, what could happen. But 12 states are on board now for having freedom to marry.
If we look at where the history of both mental health and addiction treatment, we have had progress in having more gender-specific care. In the early days in Alcoholics Anonymous, women weren't even allowed to talk or sit at the table.
I ended up going to Appalachian State University, and the first semester I was in college, I was able to take a women's studies class, and I saw that and I was like, women's studies? What is this? I had no idea. This is way out of my range.
What year was it?
This was in 1996.
Okay.
And, but I hadn't had anyone say, like, there's this experience of empowerment or this talk about equality. Oh,
Crazy talk.
Not a topic of conversation at my house. So yeah, it really opened my eyes up to a lot of things that I had never encountered before. I never heard anyone speaking about within my friends or anything. So that was a whole new experience for me.
And that's when I started noticing how much I wanted a wife. Wow, a wife is a great thing to have because she does everything. The way I feel that I was successful is that my son has 3 children of his own. He works full-time as an architect. He considers himself and his wife equals in taking care of their home, taking care of their children. He never gives the impression that I'm helping her out. And I'm very, very proud of him.
I never would have played sports. And I think without playing sports, I would not have developed leadership skills, I would not have understood teamwork, I would not have understood selflessness. And from a career standpoint, I mean, Mary was talking about not even realizing you had choices. To me, I had choices. And it was, I would never have gone into business. I would never have gone into business thinking that I could be the president of a very large corporation. I believed that until I got in there and realized that the door was open for me because of the women's movement. But once in there, there certainly was a glass ceiling. I think that it provided me with all the opportunities that I had to do what I wanted from a career perspective. It was huge for me.
Where the research was starting to notice that little girls were called on a lot less than boys. So I was very aware of that. And also that boys were expected to be better in math and science, and girls were expected not to be very good in those things. And I was just very aware of that and trying to make sure in the books I chose to read to the kids and the books that the children had to read, that there was a little equality involved.
She was a Republican, I was a Democrat, and we made it our mission to get women appointed to the judgeships, and we certainly did.
Yeah.
I remember working with a woman who had been living in the restroom of the bus station because she was abused by her husband. And we just kind of took her in at that time and found homes for her with some of our members. Now there are shelters for battered women. They're still being battered, but there are places for them to go. There are people to help them.
So now you've seen some pioneering women, Ann Bancroft, who explored a new continent, Betty McCollum, my Congresswoman. You've gotten to know Silvia and Cece, multiple generations. You've heard about what the women's movement has meant personally to them and to some other women. Now let's take a moment to do a whirlwind tour of some data showing the progress women have made.
Remember the first women's dream, 51% representation everywhere? Here's how we're doing on women in Congress. From 11 women in 1970 to 99 in 2014. Pretty good. In healthcare, it's so hard to choose because there's been so many advances. The atrocities of involuntary sterilization have ended. Survival rates for breast cancer are up. Title IX revolutionized athletics. But I'm going to choose heart disease as the #1 killer of American women. And we have started recognizing women's symptoms are different. We need special services for women of color. We've made progress. For human rights, we could talk about lesbian rights, we could talk about access to education, but I have to say birth control, family planning, abortion rights, that's been huge progress since the 70s. The women's movement has also led to progress on peace and safety, with networks of battered women's shelters and sexual assault centers, the Violence Against Women Act, some systemic coordinated responses, and recognition of issues like cyberstalking and assault on women in the military. The best way to measure the economic security, I think, is the earnings gap, and that has changed dramatically from 59 cents on the dollar in 1973 to 77 cents in 2012.
So really, yay for women. Although this chapter has talked about the wonderful progress women have made, I'm hearing my ancestors here muttering in my ear that women's work is not yet done. Let's spend a couple more minutes with that data showing what still needs to happen to make women's dreams come true.
Back to the issue of women in Congress, it's great to have 99 women, but there are still 436 men in Congress, so those women are pretty lonely sometimes. And yes, there are threats to women's health despite the progress. Threats to the Affordable Care Act, Medicare and Medicaid funding, and special concerns for women of color. Despite the progress on peace and safety, violence is still a part of life for millions of American women. There are 4.8 million intimate partner-related physical assaults and rapes in the U.S. every year. And for economic justice, what is a woman's work really worth? Let's hear another story I just recorded a few weeks ago at Hamline University.
My name is Riley Miller, and I was paid a couple of months ago to look after my grandmother. It was an emergency, and I looked after her for a day and stayed overnight and part of the next day, and I was paid $20. But my male cousin, after I had to go back to school, he was paid for one day $40. And I asked my grandfather why he chose to pay us that way, and he said it was expected of me, but it was an imposition for him. And he didn't realize that it was also an imposition for me. And I realized that it's family, but it was very unfair.
Okay, we've talked about some successes of the women's movement and some of the work that still needs to be done. Let's get back to Cece and Silvia. I asked them what they're working on now that helps women.
One project that Grub Garden Raised Bounty is currently working on this upcoming year is called Project Mama. And Mama stands for Mothers Advancing Microagriculture. And it's specifically to deliver backyard gardens to single mothers. And to provide those single mothers with mentors who are previous gardeners from our program who are also single mothers, and to create this cycle of mentorship and empowerment through single mothers. Because I think, in particular, the issue of things like food deserts, where there are places in the country where there's not enough or not any healthy, affordable food, is especially affecting people like single mothers.
Well, we are still thinking that if there was an immigration reform that can provide these women that are working here a path to either have a driver's license or a work permit, that would be really something. Because women here, immigrants, they come in very, very deteriorated conditions. And when they are here, they leave their families, their kids, by themselves just to provide, because they have gone through so much.
Thank you, Silvia Ontaneda and Cecelia Watkins. For information about future episodes, minbonnie@gmail.com. Unfinished Business Chapter 1 was taped in the SPNN Studios, St. Paul, Minnesota, December 2012. Producer Bonnie Watkins, Technical Director Michael Rosberg, Camera Operator Stephen Dodds, and Post-Production Assistants John Zakel and Johnny Watkins. Thank you to the stars of Chapter 1, Ann Bancroft, Congresswoman Betty McCollum, Silvia Ontaneda, and Cecelia Watkins. Thank you to other interviewees, Kathy Hagan, Ellie Skelton, Carol Connolly, Riley Miller, and to Dr. Jenny Kyle, Angie Kelly and Dinah Kolker-Cobo, Sue Muller, Judy Peace Greenberg, and Karen Shulman. Thanks to the additional crew, Libby Donahue, Faith Zwemke, John Zakel, Cecelia Watkins, Bill Greenberg, Katja Stanonik, Johnny Andres Watkins, and Judy Peace Greenberg. Here are the data sources for Chapter 1, the U.S. House of Representatives, Boston Women's Health Collective, the National Cancer Institute, the National Women's Law Center, Ms. Magazine, Her Votes, Farah Ahmad, Health of Women of Color, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Understanding Intimate Partner Violence. Coming soon, Faith and Libby join the crew. Also coming soon, Mike Rosberg's wonderful painting of Bonnie's maternal ancestors becomes the backdrop. Upcoming chapters include Beyond One Woman at a Time, talking about new organizational models, Cultural Communities working on violence prevention, Pay Equity, a strategy case study, and a glimpse of the wonderful women of Kentucky and Arizona, besides the other 3 states I've been so far.